Okay, friends, if you will be so kind to sit down, we'll be so kind to give it a roll. Great, and as people come in, I trust they will come in quietly, and we will have at it. Good morning, thank you, good afternoon, no longer morning to be sure. Thank you for choosing this session. There are profoundly powerful sessions going on in every room. Obviously, that's the way the Skoll enterprise does it. It's all important. I went to one session a little while ago on gross national product, since I think about how to deal with economics all day. And then I darted into this room where women were talking about what it means to be a woman in other nations, where if you're raped, you could go to jail, where your life is in jeopardy every day. And it's an extraordinary reminder of the power of this group of people, the enterprise, the folks that the Skoll Foundation has brought together to take on some of the world's toughest problems. The problem we're going to talk about today, and hopefully it's part of the solution and not only part of the problem, is capitalism, is how to use the power, the strength, the depth of capitalism to scale the kind of values, social, environmental values, worker safety, climate change, water, to integrate them into every part of the capitalistic system, not because it's the nice thing to do, not because it's philanthropic, not because somebody wants to look good, but because it is a fundamental, foundational part of the economic and the business equation. So we're going to talk about that any minute. Let me first do some housekeeping things as a few more people walk in. One is, I'm reminded to ask you to silence all of your phones, but don't shut them off. We're tweeting here. After all, this is the Skoll Social Enterprise Group. This is the group that understands network communications, social marketing. There should be, and I urge you for there to be at your very desk, tweeting throughout this session. So please silence your phones, but don't shut them off. The Twitter hashtag, and I just learned what that meant a month ago when my staff told me I had to be tweeting. So I think I know what a hashtag is Skoll.WF, #Skoll.WF. Let me make two other announcements, and then we're going to launch right in. One is there's something called the Cisco Lab, the CoLab. There's an enterprise building, a project between the Skoll Foundation and the Cisco Corporation about how to scale networking, how to build networking into our enterprises in a way that allows us to work with, communicate with, collaborate with millions rather than dozens of people. It is something that we know will be of value to all of us. Nobody knows exactly what it looks like just yet. It is in design. They have graciously invited all of us to be part of that design. How do you build the kind of networks and systems using the best technological minds that Cisco has and the best technological innovators and non-technological innovators, but visionaries? That's all of you. How to bring those things together to think about, take what we're all doing and turbocharge it by millions in our ability to reach people. I could think of no more gracious invitation than each of us being invited to stop by that CoLab to help create. You know, I was good at law school. I was very bad at science and math. So I could never have dreamed of inventing a light bulb. But to be able to dream of inventing a system and being part of a collaboration that invents a system that allows us to network and talk to people that we want to be talking to in the tens of millions and hundreds of millions instead of dozens and hundreds is a great gift. So thank you to all of the Skoll Foundation and Cisco. And you're all invited, we're all invited to stop by that CoLab in Said rooms 12 and 13. And then finally, let me just note that we will be taking questions. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Very quickly, my name is Mindy Luber. It is a delight and a pleasure to be here. I'm quite honored. I run an organization out of the Boston area in the United States called Ceres, where we work to integrate sustainability into capital markets, issues like climate change and water risk and the depletion of our natural resources, how to make sure they're part of the business opportunity. They're not an add-on, as I said before. They are integrated into the way investors think, analyze think, businesses do business. They're integrated into the way credit rating agencies rate companies or rate bonds. They're integrated into the way regulators think about the economy and the way the stock exchanges do. And interestingly, I think that's starting to happen. Not everywhere, far too slowly. We need to get it to scale, and some of the folks here on our panel are doing just that. I also want to note that I'm a Skoll social entrepreneur, and I could think of nothing that has been more of a profound honor over the last 5 or 6 years to be part of your community. Every person that I have met at these gatherings for the last 5 years give me inspiration, give me hope, allow me as a mother. When I was in politics working for Bill Clinton, I used to, in every speech, talk about Abe and Jesse, my 2 children, who at that time I think were 6 and 2. Now they're 21 and 17. But having a PhD in worrying, I am equally as worried about them today as I was then, because we're building a future at the moment that can sustain a world for them in the way we lived our lives. I believe part of the solution, there's no one solution, the people in this room are about multiple solutions, but part of the solution, while politics isn't working in many countries, while international treaties are stalled, and indeed we need those treaties, we need rules and we need laws. But while those things are stalled, and painfully so, we need some of the largest players with the largest amount of resources, the most employees, the people who create products to integrate sustainability into the business plan, not as an off-balance sheet risk, not as an externality, not as something you do on a good day or a good year, not as something you do to look good, not as something to only protect reputational value, but because they need to. If you just think about any business, any part of our capitalist system, can you build a business without enough water? McKinsey tells us we're 40% short on water over the next 20 years globally, and of course, as we know, in some parts of the world, we're 80 or 90% short. You can't build a system based on water sometimes today and sometimes not so much. And you can't build a world with climate change continuing to increase. As carbon emissions go up and weather patterns change and droughts hit and agricultural crops are annihilated, and the drought in Texas last year annihilated cotton crops, killing businesses, wreaking havoc on shareholder value of the Gap, of Levi Strauss, and of hundreds and thousands of other companies. We see that integrating the risk of sustainability as well as the opportunities are a crucial part of our business systems. We've got to integrate it at the fiduciary level. These issues need to be looked at as major material issues at boards, and those boards need to set goals about it. They need to be part of the compensation models. We all know that we all deliver on goals that we set. How do we make sure that CEOs are compensated for sustainability metrics, not only for how many widgets we created and what our share value looked like? The way to drive share value is to address these sustainability issues. We need to look at our business models. Why are things like car sharing around the world taking hold? We don't need to keep buying more cars, sometimes share cars. The models are there. Every new product, every new facility, every employee program, and what we expect of our supply chain has to incorporate the kind of social, human values and the environmental imperatives that we face if we're going to build a future for Abe and Jesse and your kids and your families. If we're going to for a system of opportunity, massive resources in capital markets, terrific smarts in capital markets, millions upon millions of employees who could be part of the solution, and we've got some models that are starting to work. We've got a panel today that is extraordinary. Individuals who in their own right, whether it's from a systems perspective, a company perspective, a product perspective, or as an investor, are moving capital markets in profound ways. They are visionaries. They've got great examples, and we're going to roll right into talking to each of them. What we're going to do is talk for about a half hour, and then we're going to open it up. It will be a conversation. We'll challenge each other. We invite you to challenge us, but be prepared to be part of the discussion and not just here to listen. Let me quickly, and I think I am not going to read bios. You all have it in your materials, so no reason for me to read to you what you can read to yourself. I'm going to tell you the order we're going to go in. We're going to start with Roberto Artavia, the chair of Viva Trust, but an accomplished guy who thinks about the not-for-profit sector, the government level changes that we need, as well as a highly productive business guy, has some great models to share. And then we're going to go to Mike Barry from Marks & Spencer, who has taken on a comprehensive sustainability strategy for the entire company and is driving it through and turbocharging that company in a way that's not only changing how they're doing business, but making substantial amounts of money in the process. And then we're going to go to Gary Milstead, who's not on one of the program lists, but is on all of the others. He should be on everybody's list. He's the head of procurement for Nestle's, and he is driving a program around coffee for Nescafé that is a winner on every score: social, environmental, and economic. It is the triple bottom line win-win-win that we're all looking for. And then finally, an old friend of mine, James Cameron, who has been a leader in the financial community, has been sounding the bell about addressing climate change as one of the most compelling moral, national security, public health, but in his case, economic imperatives of our time. And he's probably done more to make that case than anyone I could imagine. So let's jump right in with Roberto. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here and for the opportunity to address you tonight. I've been asked to sort of introduce the topic from my perspective of an emerging country entrepreneur, of an emerging country expert, if there is such a thing. The way we look at sustainability is somewhat different because when we started this conversation, let's say in Rio 1992, fundamentally, we were talking about an environmental crunch, about an environmental problem that has certainly been not been solved. As a matter of fact, when we looked at the conclusions of Rio and the challenges presented then, I would say that in global terms, we are worse off now than we were in 1992. So we certainly haven't done a very good job since we started working on this problem. But our sustainability framework has to go beyond that. As we saw in the last few months around the world, it needs to worry also about social equity. It needs to worry about the institutional backbone of countries so that whenever there is a financial crisis or a social crisis, the entire system, the entire government does not crumble and break in pieces. It also needs to worry fundamentally about the economic basis. And when we look at the latest financial and economic crisis, when we looked at what happened in capital markets around the world, we need to understand that macroeconomics matter as a component of sustainability. And of course, we need to go back to the creation of wealth. We need to create jobs. We need to create production. We need to create the goods and services that we need for everybody in the world, and not just the 2 billion that live very well off today, can reach a minimum level of consumption, which is at least fair and surpasses the basic threshold that we have set for ourselves. The fact is that we have not achieved that in 2012, and chances are that we will not if we continue to run the systems as we are today. So when we look at sustainability, we have to think fundamentally about 6 things. The well-being of people. We need to think about wealth creation. We need to think about environmental sustainability, eco-efficiency, critical resource management. We need to think about sound macroeconomic and capital markets. We need to think about institutional innovation, development, governance. And of course, we need to think of all of them together and simultaneously. Of course, when we look at this, the answer usually comes from some of the optimists, if we can call it that. Oh, don't worry, technology will fix it. Don't worry, there will be trickle down and eventually everybody will move up. But the fact is that that is not happening. When we look at the world statistics today, what we find is the most uneven distribution of wealth in the history of the world today. When we look at how many people live in poverty today, although it is a lower percentage of the total, it's still a large unacceptable number from any perspective. When you look at what is happening in the use of resources, we just heard what is happening to water, just one example of the environmental challenges that we're going to face. So how do we challenge that? What is the solution? Of course, the answer is very simple to express, very difficult to achieve. But the fact is that we have let the situation gotten to a point where no one sector, no government, no business sector, and no civil society by itself will be able to fill the gaps. We actually have to enter an age of collaboration and exchange. But when I say that, I don't just mean that we need to have forums like this, which are incredibly useful. We actually need to interact constantly. The other day, I was listening to a Colombian and a Spaniard presenters talking about the need to have philosophers on our boards, corporate boards. And they were asking, when was the last time anybody asked, how much do you worry about happiness? How much do you worry about fairness? How much do you worry about the existential questions of well-being in the world when you meet as a board? And if you're not entering those questions into your analysis, how do you ever expect to provide solutions to them? So when we talk about responsible business today, we're not just talking about the triple bottom line, which is an important component and one which I completely support and which I live in the corporations in which I'm related to. But fundamentally, we need to start asking different questions if we want to hear and to listen to different answers. We need to start exchanging principles and values with civil society. We need to start feeding government with the right questions, because if you look at what happened recently in Tunisia or Egypt, and you looked at the economic statistics, the countries were growing just fine. If you look at the averages in their human development indexes, they were moving up. So how come they were so unsatisfied with their life, with their government, and their situation, that they got to the point of completely breaking down the system? That was one case in which sustainability was broken up, not by economics, not even environmental factors, but by social institutional factors. And therefore, we have to come back to look at sustainability as a combination of those 5 elements that we have to worry about simultaneously today. The other thing that I would like to say is that if we need a change of culture and a change of practices, this is not going to happen because we talk about it. We can talk about it until we're blue, and it's not going to happen unless we regulate it, we make it into laws, and fundamentally, we make it into the practices, the common daily practices of businesses. And this is only going to happen by introducing into our midst voluntarily, even before they become the law or they become a regulation in our industry, we have to introduce not only the processes of certification, all the ISOs and all the forestry stewardship councils and all the other forms of certification of worker safety and so on. We need to upgrade the standard, but also to start asking us the questions of what is the real triple bottom line? What is the quality of life of our workers? Let me just give you 2 quick examples. I work intensely in my country, in Costa Rica, in corporate social responsibility organizations. There is 31 organizations, including some very well-known multinational corporations, which are the leaders of this movement in Costa Rica. Well, the other day we decided to run a study in them, and we found that 8% of the workforces of those 31 companies lived under the poverty line. And of course, their CEOs and their board said, well, but we didn't know. The reason they didn't know is because they never measured and they never really asked their workers how they were doing in personal terms. So if we're going to talk about a triple bottom line, if we're going to talk about new ways to challenge the 5 areas of sustainability, we're going to have to start asking different questions and using different metrics to evaluate the performance of all of our organizations. Not one sector, government, civil society, or business, is capable of solving this by itself. But the bridges will have to be created formally, and the culture will only change when we create the instruments, the incentives, and even the punishments necessary in order for culture to move to what it ought to be today. The fact of the matter is, when you look at the 99% movement in the U.S., regardless of how well it is doing and whether it's legitimate or not, I don't want to enter that discussion, there is a significant portion of the population, even in arguably the most successful economic system of the last 200 years, that says the system is breaking down. There is deep dissatisfaction among the population. And the reason it doesn't collapse is because it has this strong institutional backbone. The Constitution of the U.S. remains one of the most wonderful documents ever written, in my opinion. But because they have that institutional backbone, they haven't broken up. but the fact is that they are being unfair, and the distribution of their productivity, of their wealth, of their systems, of their access to scarce water in the West and everything else is today not representative of a successful company, a successful country. And let me just finish quoting one of my mentors. There is no such thing as a successful individual, company, or organization in a failed society. And when we see the levels of poverty, unfairness, the levels of inequity in all of our countries, can we really say that we live in successful societies? When a significant percentage of the people are rebelling against the structures that we have set, can we claim success? And if we're not successful as countries, as societies, as communities, can we claim that we are successful as individuals or companies? In my opinion, the answer is no. And I hope later in the question section, I will have a little more time to tell you about the models and the specific processes we're using to bridge the existing gaps and to bring civil society, public-private alliances, and many other forms of exchange across sectors to start solving these situations. Thank you very much. How long did it take?
Perfect.
Thank you, Roberto. Roberto's given a fantastic big picture. And now I'm going to step in and try to give a practical view as to how one business has started to understand how to respond to this very significant challenge to capitalism. Now, let me just do 1 minute on how a business might be seeing this pressure on capitalism now. There are 3 challenges from our perspective. Firstly is a challenge of cost. Wherever we look, the costs into our basic business model are going in the wrong direction. Whether it's cocoa, soy, wheat, whether it's labour, whether it's water, whether it's been oil, fertiliser, plastics. Every single input into our business model, even in a depressed marketplace, certainly here in the West, has gone in the wrong direction. Why? Competition from the developing world. Brazil, Russia, India and China wants the cotton we've taken for granted here in the West. Challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 within that, the challenge of climate change is starting to squeeze the availability of those raw materials, driving the cost up all the time. So wherever we look, we've got a cost pressure that's only going to get harder and more volatile in the future. Then we've got a challenge of a consumer. Now, at the moment, consumers, people would suggest, are not interested in green issues. Yes, they are. But we're just not finding the right way to connect with them. And social media is utterly disrupting and changing the nature of businesses' interaction with its consumer and citizens. Anybody can peer into our world now. Anybody can start a campaign. Anybody can ask questions. The ability of business to hide things behind the scenes are gone. The business that can find a way to connect with those 80% of consumers that do want change, but don't have to pay for it, don't have to have a PhD in science to understand it, will win. So there is a second challenge of consumer. And then there is a third challenge, which is competition. We're starting to see in most industrial sectors now that we peer into, that we interact with, there are 1 or 2 companies starting to break away and do something quite different on sustainability. A lot of chief executives are very nervous. They don't fully understand why company X has gone over there and they're here, but people are starting to get worried. Put those 3 things together, the cost pressure, the consumer pressure, and the competition pressure, and you have, for the first time in the chief exec's mind in the business, disruption. For the first time, people begin to fear that sustainability can be disruptive and fundamentally threaten the existence of their business. Even 2 years ago, they didn't think that. It was just CSR. It was a reputational risk. You might have a bad day in the press, but then it would go. Now it's fundamentally about your business's existence in the future. So that's no more than 30 seconds to set the scene. Why we're worried, why we're working on sustainability. What are the 5 practical steps we're taking to build a more sustainable business in the future? Firstly, you need a plan. Second, you've got to integrate it into the business. Third, you've got to interact with the consumer differently. Fourthly, you've got to build partnerships. Fifth, you've got to innovate. So let me just spend 1 minute on each of those. A plan. How can you build a business plan for sustainability? Well, first you need intelligence. Whether it's science, whether it's stakeholder views, whether it's benchmarking on what your competitors and peers are doing, you need the very best intelligence to decide what you act on, what set of targets you set, and how you integrate it into your future business strategy going forward. We're a relatively small retailer. We only sell 35,000 different product lines, from 3,000 factories, 20,000 farms, thousands of raw material sources. We only sell 2.7 billion individual items to 21 million customers. That is a small business model. Every single part of that business model needs to change. That is our plan. So there is a very real need to plan what you're going to do, otherwise you'll have chaos within your business. The second thing you must do, you must integrate. I'm very privileged that I'm head of sustainability for Marks & Spencer, but I don't run stores. I don't run lorries. I don't run factories. I don't design products. I don't make them. I don't market them. The people who do must own these issues. So within our business, people now have their bonusable objectives based upon delivering our Plan A, our sustainability plan. We have management information that gives us real-time information about how we're performing on sustainability, just as we would on commercial metrics that we run our business by. So again, you have to drive it to the very heart of your business. You need a plan, you integrate it, you get everybody, 78,000 employees to own this, not just one person. Third thing, the consumer. I've already said the consumer is not happy with where they've got. They are dissatisfied with what we're offering them in terms of sustainability. There is a marketplace waiting to explode for the business that connect with the consumer. Not with lots of labels, but by the smart use of social technology, the smart use of clever use of smartphones to hold information for consumers so they can access it when they want. And fundamentally with the consumer to build a tribe. What people are telling us is, we want to change, but it feels scary on my own. But if I'm part of a tribe where 10 million, 20 million, 30 million people are each doing one thing, and that one thing is replicated across millions to make a big difference, we will come with you. So you need a fundamentally different interaction with the consumer, fundamentally different idea, but consumers do want change. The fourth thing is partnership. Roberto has already eloquently said why you need to reach out to government, to civil society, everybody around you. So some of the partnerships we're developing, for example, the Sustainability Consortium in the States is starting to create a common science-based understanding of sustainable consumer products. It would cost me millions of dollars to develop my own system to do a life cycle assessment on every one of those 35,000 products. Why not share it with Coca-Cola, Walmart, Nike, other good people out there that are trying to do the same thing as well? We need a common way of partnering with government. There is not a single government in the world at the moment that's actively developing policies that help business become sustainable, or as fast as they need to do. The World Economic Forum, again, is a vehicle where we can start to bring business and government together to work in partnership to develop those system changes. And then there's a challenge of scale. We are one of the biggest commercial buyers of cotton in the world, and yet we're a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the world's actual cotton production. We have to work together with people in the Better Cotton Initiative, multiple buyers of cotton to drive consistent change in that industry. The same with soya, the same with palm oil, the same with sugar. Many commodities need those buying groups. So partnership is right at the heart of a sustainable business. And the fifth and final thing, to wrap things up, innovation. Fundamentally, what we're talking about with most business plans on sustainability at the moment is creeping incrementalism. It's 2% better every year. And that's a nice place to start to get things moving. It will not build a sustainable future within the next 10 to 20 years that we need. We need radical step change. We need to shift from selling products, those 2.7 billion items of stuff that we sell every year. That's just M&S. 100 billion items of clothing sold around the world each year. 2 trillion items of food. We need to shift from an economy that's about stuff and volume to one that is fundamentally about service that the consumer can buy into. We need to close the loop. We need to value biodiversity. We need a whole new range of technologies and materials, raw materials that are truly sustainable. So that's the template for change. 5 things that a business can do to fundamentally become more sustainable. Plan, integrate, develop partnerships, work with the consumer differently, and innovate. So let me conclude. Business has to change. This is no longer a nice to do. Those 3 pressures of cost, competition, and I forget the third one. I do apologise. But those 3 pressures, put us under huge pressure in terms of the need to change. But there is a simple template by which business can start to respond to those things going forward. And the businesses that do will prosper. Last year, we made $100 million surplus cash for the business from becoming more sustainable. There will be much more to come in the future. Thank you for your time, and we'll take questions a little bit later.
My name's Gary Milstead, and I'm Head of Procurement for Commodities for Zone Europe for Nestlé. I'm not running procurement totally for the organisation. I haven't given myself a promotion just yet. But within the Nestlé corporate environment, we've taken on the strategy of creating shared value at a corporate level. And so creating shared value is about ensuring that whether it's in society or for shareholder, right through the chain, there is value for everybody in that chain. For us, there is a pyramid around creating shared value. At the base of that pyramid is compliance. It's making sure that all of the rules, the expectations, the codes of conduct are being adapted and adhered to. Then you move up into sustainability. This is ensuring that the needs of today don't destroy the opportunity for future generations. But then we want to go one step further and create value for people all along the chain. And this is about how do we build that value into society? How do we as a manufacturing organization ensure that both the farmers that we work with, the consumer, the shareholder, the employee, and everyone in between gets value out of having done business with Nestlé? So if that's the corporate vision, then how do we bring this to life when we start to look at the myriad of products that we have within the Nestlé organization? Yes, we are the world's largest food and drink company, but we represent, in terms of food and drink, 1.8% of total market. It's an incredibly fragmented business. But then within specific businesses, we have a reasonable footprint. So we have an opportunity to play leader, to really help to drive some change. So when we start to think specifically about coffee, there is the Nescafé business and there is the Nespresso business. So a lot of what I'm going to speak about today is focused primarily about Nescafé. It occupies the mainstream sector. It's the mass market component. It has a range of products, both from a price-fighting perspective, but also at the premium and freeze-dried sectors. When we go and meet farmers, almost unanimously, they say, I grow coffee to get an income so that my children can have a better life. Now that creates an issue for us because we'd like to still have some coffee coming into our factories over the next 10, 20 years. We'd still like to be the #1 coffee company. And if there isn't enough coffee in the world, then what's going to happen? Where does that consumption, where does that manufacturing base come from? Because today the farmer and the children of today's farmer don't see coffee growing as a viable business activity. There's not value in it. If there's not value in it, they won't be doing it for much longer. Either they'll be growing something else or they'll move off. And we're seeing tremendous urbanization from the agricultural sector already. So we need to address the fact that all through the chain, right down to the farmer, there is value for it. So it's not about necessarily per se the price, but it's about farmer income. What are the drivers that helps a farmer to improve his income? Is it diversification of crop? Is it about yield? Is it about quality? Is it about input costs? These are the questions. And when you go and visit farmers in different countries, the issues are different in every single country. The constraints, the impediments for income growth are massive and diverse. But there are some similarities when you start to actually do a bit of root cause analysis and start to understand what's going on. Because the farmers don't see coffee production as a viable business venture for the future and for their children, and because we continue to see coffee consumption growth in the vicinity of 2% year on year, guess what? We need another 20 million bags of coffee over the next 10 years beyond today's production, just to meet future demand growth. Now, 20 million bags, that's equivalent to the #2 producer in the world today. That's another 2.5 Colombias. You don't turn these countries on overnight. Even if you made the decision now to start a new country with another 5 million bag production, it'd be 3 years before you start to see that production coming through. So the need for change is immediate. In fact, we've probably missed the point. So as an industry, we're saying there is an absolute need. As the #1 coffee consumer in the world, we need to make sure that there is a viable production in the future. And when you start to look at the statistics, yield in almost all but 2 countries in the world is going down. We believe that actually the next 10 to 15 years of future demand growth can be met with the acreage that's already dedicated to coffee today. But then we need to apply new rules, break the paradigms, the history of the culture that's currently with a lot of the coffee farmers in order to help them see the way to make their farms more productive, to help them with a better income and at the same time meet the needs of the global expectation for more coffee into the future. So because of all of these pressures and these issues, Nestlé launched a thing called the Nescafé Plan in 2010. And it's based on 3 pillars. It's based on responsible agriculture, responsible manufacturing, and responsible consumption. So if we talk specifically about responsible agriculture, part of the announcement and the targets that we are setting out is to ensure that the supply chain that we have control over. So Nescafé has more coffee manufacturing plants in countries where coffee is grown than any other roaster, and by a long shot. We are, I think, around between 10 and 20% of our global consumption comes from these supply chains where we have people on the ground. It's our factories that are being fed by the local coffee growers. We hired our first coffee agronomists back in 1963. We've been working with farmers for quite a long time. We've got a lot of knowledge. So the Nescafé plan is actually harvesting the knowledge from all of these various countries around the world where we've had people on the ground bringing that knowledge into our organisation. But we also recognise we can't drive this solution on our own. We need partners. We need to learn from the experiences from other organisations, whether they're donor organisations, trading organisations, the growers themselves, and bring best practices together and help people to grow. So our announcement is also to distribute 220 million disease-resistant, higher-yielding plantlets over the next 10 years. I'm not aware of any other roaster that's doing any such program, and the scale of this is tremendous. Our history in the past is we would distribute something like 3, 4, 5 million plantlets per year. So we're ramping up our investment in terms of our plant science technology and our ability to propagate plants and distribute them to the places where they are needed so that farmers can address issues. If we look at Colombia, for example, one of the issues they have is rust resistance or lack of. Coffee trees suffer from rust. We're able, with our partners, the Federation in Colombia, to provide rust-resistant plantlet varieties so that the farmers can have higher yield into the future. We're investing 350 million Swiss francs over those 10 years to ensure that we deliver on our ambition for the Nescafé plan at an agricultural level. We're also supporting our responsible manufacturing. We're looking to reduce our energy consumption by 20% per coffee factory. We're also looking to reduce our water consumption by 30% per coffee factory over those 10 years. We already have 2 coffee factories that are water neutral today. We have the blueprint and we're rolling it out, and we're spending the money to make that happen. But interestingly, when you look at the product life cycle, the biggest part of the energy consumption in the whole process is when the consumer boils the water to make the cup of coffee. It's actually the highest intensity of energy in the whole process. And I think there are some solutions in there that we're currently investigating in terms of educating the consumer, in terms of what they can contribute to the overall end-to-end process in terms of life cycle assessment and carbon footprint. So there's a lot of aspects there. There's a lot of commitment from our organisation. But I think that the holistic thing here is by changing the way we do procurement, by changing the way that we work with farmers in origin, by the way that we bring transparency and address some of the issues that exist today in the coffee-producing areas, it becomes a win-win for the farmers and for our organisation. The farmer, we hope, will see the opportunity to be able to continue to grow the right quality coffee, thereby increasing his income. Improve the quantity that's being produced, thereby increasing his income. Managing the input costs more effectively, they're reducing his cost and hopefully looking at an improved income source for the entire family. There are real opportunities to diversify crop. And to give one example, and apologies for those that attended an earlier session this morning, I think in Kenya there's around about 350 kilos per hectare is the average production in Kenya. The world average is close to 800 kilos, and best in class in Vietnam is around 2 tons per hectare. The opportunity for improvement for a number of countries to improve their yield without even getting to best in class is tremendous. This is about income improvement, it's about yield improvement. At the end of the day, it meets future demand growth, so we don't have to create more acreage dedicated for coffee plantations. It's a challenge, but we're looking for partners, and we've started the path towards delivering on improved income going forward. So looking forward to having a broader discussion later. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Mindy, for the introduction, and to Skoll for their fabulous event. There is just no doubt that capitalism is seriously under pressure, but we know that we can respond well to a bit of pressure, and it's a good time for a bit of reimagining of what this system can do to deliver welfare and indeed to focus on public goods. And at a time like this, there is a craving for somebody somewhere to focus on the public goods. And perhaps we have forgotten some of the attributes of the state that could provide that for us, and there's a certain loss of confidence and faith in the state to deliver those protections, particularly around the common goods that are beyond national borders, which we have touched upon in many previous conversations, and climate change perhaps is the ultimate example, but fisheries collapse and depletion of other public goods that support the economic system that we depend upon is really a fact of tremendous difficulty and complexity. So as I think about the responses that you've heard from already, and my own experience in building enterprises to deal with these problems, there's a few observations. Firstly, that craving for the involvement of the state is actually also a craving for rules. And Roberta, you mentioned this before. I used to be an international lawyer, and the person who taught me gave me a phrase that I've hung on to ever since, which is that law is in many sense a will to perfection. It's a way of making the best of ourselves. It also offers constraints against our worst excesses. And the craving for the state is also a craving for rules. And in many of the examples you've heard so far, these are rules being put in place by societies called corporations. Yeah? Societies within a society that are able to construct rules, have them applied, and make a material difference to the world in which they operate in. In my experience in building up a couple of those enterprises, I've had to draw in mainstream investors who perhaps don't share the same ideals and would not have made investments to deliver the outcomes we'd wished if we'd simply offered them a let's make the world a better place proposition. So in Climate Change Capital, we raised money from mainstream pension funds. In the boom times, it was quite easy to get funds under management. We raised $1.5 billion really very fast. I remember in one particularly exciting period raising about 900 million euros in 6 months. And those days are definitely gone. But the investors that put money into a business called Climate Change Capital, and believe me, it's been quite difficult to run a business called Climate Change Capital in recent years, with declining interest in climate change. If you just look at the media reporting and usage of the word climate change is about 40% down in the last year and heading south. It's true that it's dropped down the political agenda as well. The capital markets haven't been flowing freely at all. It's been extremely difficult to raise capital. Big institutional investors have gone away from risk. There's much less risk capital available. And many of the mainstream investors have just been sitting, repairing balance sheets and not doing anything to venture into difficult areas. And much of our investment was not only for climate change, but in emerging markets, a sort of double emerging market risk. It's extremely difficult in the last 3 years to be doing this work. But we were able to raise money in better times and deployed it in mainstream asset classes like property, green buildings, but also in more adventurous areas driven by a carbon price. Clean technology would be another area where we put money to work. And although the financial crisis has perhaps put out the date at which I could honestly tell you how well those investments are doing, most of those funds are 10-year funds and we're not near performance yet, I'm pretty satisfied that the investments we've made will do well by comparison to mainstream investments. Our investors won't have lost out by the focus on the environment or sustainability. And having an idealistic vision of creating wealth worth having, which is what drives Climate Change Capital, has also been extremely difficult to maintain amongst staff in an organization when times got really tight. Because, as you all know, when there's scarcity even within a corporation, writ larger, obviously, in a society, people tend to compete fiercely for what's right in front of them, and they lose some of the long-term vision. And that's made it very difficult to manage an organization, particularly when most of your employees have been trained in the ways of investment banking and private equity, and they know very well how to get the most out of a business right now, and never mind the future. But the net result is that we have a living organism called Climate Change Capital that is putting money to work in these sectors. And we're learning all the time what works and what doesn't work. And we're now going to be part of a much bigger agribusiness, and we'll be able to do much more impact investing, for example, much more risk-taking in emerging markets. Now, one example along the way of something I wasn't able to do inside Climate Change Capital, but did with others, with the help of Capricorn, one of the Skoll investment businesses, I think offers an insight into how we can do what I like to call, a little bit of what Berto has been saying, it's a radical cooperation, putting unlikely elements together in furtherance of a sustainability ideal and producing good returns. So we made an investment in Tanzania in a rice farm. It took a long time to negotiate the land ownership. Many of you will know how controversial and difficult it is for an external investor to buy 5,000 hectares in a country like Tanzania. But we had someone who was really well situated locally, knew the country very well, and we were able to purchase the land. But as in many cases, there were many smallholders on the land who had no property rights whatsoever. And there would perhaps have been businesses who would have thought it was economic to use the power of the state to clear them off the land, or perhaps even use private enforcers, and no one knows that happens. But we didn't do that. We regularized the situation. We created a space within the property for them. We did the perhaps usual things of putting in community structures and the like that were helpful, but we brought also to them experts in improving the yields on small holdings. So we combined what we want to do for the larger land holding with bringing in some irrigation and different types of seed, but we also worked on the small holdings. And we built a marketing business. We created a new brand. There's never before been a rice brand in Tanzania. The whole point of the enterprise was to focus on the local market rather than the export market. And what we've found is a kind of magic combination of small and large, that the smallholders have improved their yields dramatically, so have the larger space with irrigation. But together, we've produced, in the course of one season, dramatic improvements in both, and a revenue stream that we never thought we would have and was not in the business plan. So we've got an extra $1 million of revenue simply from the different cooperation that we've managed to achieve, largely by having an outlet for the smallholders into the market through the new brand. Now, I'm interested in all of those sorts of cooperations. I think for over 20 years of working on environment and development issues, we have allowed ourselves the luxury of speaking too much to our own community. And we've thought of ourselves as special and different and highly knowledgeable, lots of technical language and sustainability, and we have failed to reach out and touch either the consumer at large or the raw power needed to make this transformation. And if I just close on the kind of world we are in that we need to respond to. Commodity prices have gone up so much in the last 3-4 years that they are like nothing else in history. The only other periods in history where you've had commodity spikes like that, prices, are in times of world war. There's a great quote from Neil Ferguson, historian, British historian, but based in the States, where he said, if you were looking at Earth through a Bloomberg terminal from space, and that's all you had Bloomberg and long-run commodity prices, you would assume that we were at war. So the two responses I have from that is, one, well, we're not. Why not? Well, we must have some institutions that are working. We must have some ways of keeping the peace that are working. They may be rickety. The UN, the European Union, the WTO, a number of other institutions, we may not like them very much, but there must be something going on there that's holding stuff together. We have markets that allow us to do business together. That's a very good way of keeping the peace. And have something else too. We've got networks that are starting to get really very big. And you know, those of you who play in that area, how vitally important it is to be able to communicate so quickly, so easily with others of difference. So there's something encouraging about the fact that despite all of this, we still have relative peace globally. But in a world where this situation is going to get more intense and extreme, I am very fearful that the next reaction is to close in, to hold on to what's mine, to cooperate less, to find it easier to take what's mine and not yours. And the politics of that I find really very fearful. So my observation is that we have to build institutions that inspire and encourage this radical cooperation. We've got to set lots of examples, lots of stories that we can get running, that we can communicate easily. And as yet, we have not built scale into the alternatives to the status quo. We haven't got to scale in renewables. We haven't got to scale in the large energy efficiency projects that are underway. We haven't even got to scale in the sustainable agriculture space, where I think there's huge opportunity quite close at hand. So the task is to get the big forces of capital, the big markets, to find investments that they can recognize, they feel comfortable with, that don't look too radical, but actually guide them towards this transformation. And I believe that's in infrastructure, in finding investments that look very like bonds, in investments that are to do with real assets, real property that have dividend yields, and agricultural land would be one. But also in those areas where you can connect energy, water, and food security, which is perhaps the best place to get at the climate change issue. And I'm going to leave one parting shot to you for discussion, no time in my presentation. I'm absolutely convinced that we can innovate again inside the corporate structures that we've got. That sitting between all these great ideas in the companies and all those that act in civil society and not-for-profit organizations is the know-how, dynamism, and drive that could be put into organizations expressly for resolving public goods problems. Public goods enterprises given a mandate to deliver and be rewarded for delivering on public goods by law in many jurisdictions. I'd like to see competition between jurisdictions to attract the most talented people to solve public goods problems. And the rewards can come in many ways. I'm happy to talk to you about them. But in a sense, I think that's the next step. And we're nearly there. There are lots of things, the B Corporation in the States, the Stichtings in Europe. There's some other organizations that are heading in that direction. But that next step would give many of you an opportunity to do more with your good ideas, I think.
Great. Thank you, James. Okay. We may ask some of each other questions, but let's start with this gentleman in the second row. Is there a microphone we could get down there? And then we're going to move right to this woman with the beige blouse.
Is that me?
How are we doing?
Great.
With
okay.
the microphone.
It's up here.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I think
I thought, yeah.
Okay, if you go for it. If
I'll be really quick. All right. The question is very simply this. Particularly Mike and Gary spoke so compellingly about the business case for doing the stuff you do. Why isn't everyone doing it?
Seems like the right question. Let's get some answers.
I mean, that's why I focus so much on solutions, because I think we've now gone through this cycle of business leaders denying there was a problem at all. Absolutely denied it. Just literally 3 or 5 years ago, I think they've now come to this stage where they said, there is a problem, but what do we do? And I think what businesses are looking for, great examples like Nestle have just shared with us, and this is how you systemically begin to address and rebuild a value chain so it becomes fundamentally more sustainable than the past. A lot of people are quite naive about just how much has changed in business. I rattle off some simple numbers about Marks & Spencer. 3,000 factories, 20,000 farmers, 1.7 million workers, 2.7 billion products. Walmart's 20 times bigger than us. Every single one of those numbers can be multiplied by 20, and every single element, moving part of their value chain needs to change. So it doesn't happen overnight. And what businesses are looking for are practical examples. Again, great example here from Nescafe, of it is possible, and actually if I do deliver it, things will be better. So I think we're now in a phase of the next 3 to 5 years of practical examples, and then we need to drive to scale.
I think just to enhance that, from a Nestle perspective, I think it was the visualization of the creating shared value premise and the fact that there was a realization that this is actually a model that can deliver. And then looking at the business profiles and saying, where are we exposed? Where are the bits of business that can actually bring the creating shared value concept alive? And the first launch that we went out with was the Cocoa Plan. And then we had some work done on dairy. Now we've got the Nescafe plan. And actually we're at a point where we've learnt from each of those categories as we've moved that we're rewriting the Cocoa plan because we think we've done a better job in Nescafe, and we're continually evolving and bringing to life a lot of the learnings that we're doing as we go forward. So things like vanilla sourcing, hazelnuts, these are other aspects where we are driving that model and bringing it into, say, the less higher profile areas of our business, but we now know how it works. I think the dawn has arrived, and we can see the business case that actually supports the need for the sustainable approach.
Let's go to this gentleman.
Joe Confino, The Guardian. I wanted to ask not so much about shared value, but about shared values, because it's really interesting having Marks and Spencer and Nestle, because I'm in this field. I ask a lot of experts what they think. They say the reason M&S is doing it because they are a values-based company. They recognize that actually they need to fundamentally change business, that they already know they need to go far, far further than they've already gone. And it's about the courage of how quickly they move. And in contrast, they describe Nestle as being behind the scenes. It's all about profit still. That you're not such a humanistic society, that you don't have the same values base, that shared value is a surface gloss, but it doesn't run deeply through the company. And I just wanted to ask that sort of question about the importance of deep values and who you share your values. Is it shared value that you choose who you share it to, or is it about actually asking whose values are these and how do we actually represent them?
I would...
Take
a shot at it, Gary. It came right to you.
Yeah.
Do you want me to quickly give a view and then Gary can give a specific Nestle response? No, but I hear what you say there, but I think a huge dollop of caution, because I see a lot of businesses out there that have values in a 20th century way, and they're guys that are sleepwalking. They're still doing CSR because they're still thinking, we were the good guys long before any of these guys got it, so we just carry on as we're doing it now. And what they're fundamentally, and often the businesses that are getting it have been the ones that have been through the mill. Marks and Spencer's had its bad press in the past. It still gets challenged now. The Nikes, the McDonald's, the Coca-Colas, the Walmarts, the guys that I think, like Marks and Spencer, have done probably 10% of the journey and therefore relative leaders, have been through some bruising battles to make us wake up. Some of those that haven't been through that bruising kicking are the ones complacently carrying on as they were. So I hear what you say. The values of M&S help, but I don't automatically think it means you succeed.
And I'm going to add one provocative thought and then let Gary defend himself, because I think there's much good reason to defend. We want everybody to be values-driven, to be sure. That's what we'll see, the comprehensive inherent integration. But if over the next 10 years, short-term, as the values are getting integrated, if companies change because they're an insurance company and they're part of the sector, property and casualty lost $44 billion last year from more intense storms created by climate change. If they change their practices, if they change their policy positions, if they change their pricing of their products, if they change how they invest half of their business, which is basically an investment firm, that will go a long way to changing capital markets, and they may not do it for values. Do I prefer, given the world that we all live in, the Skoll social entrepreneur community, that it's values-driven? Indeed. But in the short term, the implications of water shortages, of climate change, of depletion of natural resources, of abusive practices of workers, that doesn't work anymore and shouldn't work anymore for businesses. And if businesses change because they're saving money, because they're worrying about their reputation, because they're worrying about consumers, that's a good start. Let's turbocharge this uptake, better for sure, built on values. But to be sure, building it on systems change that are just logical good business in the year 2011 and 12 and 13 is a good place to be moving as well.
Because fundamentally, the winners will be the innovators. Having values helps, absolutely it helps moving you forward, but the fundamental winners in the next decade were the ones that can get off the backside and come up with new solutions. So I think to have an innovative streak in a fairly, sometimes mean business might actually help you succeed. And we shouldn't avoid that. Values and innovation together is the perfect combination.
We got to get the systems to change.
Yep.
I mean, the other issue about values, we've seen too many instances where a leader of great values changes the structure, builds sustainability, human rights into every part of the corporation. And they leave, and somehow things change because it wasn't the driver were values. We need the driver to be every part of the system. So it stays with the system. A CEO could come, could go, could be gone 2 years from now. But the systemic change, the savings, the fact that companies are realizing not having enough water, not addressing climate, not dealing with supply chain problems by closing their eyes, are things that are going to create disincentives and losses rather than the wins.
I would challenge the assumption that was asserted earlier.
I'm just trying to be
No, and I think you're succeeding. I've been with the company for 22 years, and I have to say, I think Nestlé is an incredibly principled organisation, and especially under the leadership of Peter Brabeck, who was CEO and is now chairman. And I think if you dig deep into any of it's one thing to talk it, it's another thing to deliver it. And I think this is a really important. So where are the values? Are they ingrained in the business? And are we delivering against those values? And I think the answer is categorically yes. I think under Peter Brabeck, he's a leader in water. And what Nestlé is doing in terms of leadership on water, I think is world class. And I encourage you to investigate that further. What we're doing in terms of creating shared value to life, this is not something that's just happened to arrive in the last year or two. We've been working on this for quite some time, to the point now that as a very introvert company, we're now sharing our exposure on what we are achieving. And I encourage you to go to our website. We've just recently published the Creating Shared Value Report for 2011. It measures our performance in all of the key areas where we are active. And I can assure you, in many sectors, a lot of people aren't close. So we are living the values and bringing it to life. And we're described often as a big ocean liner. If you want to change direction, it takes a long time for it to actually move. But the movement has been going for quite some time. And now we're starting to see the deliverables coming through.
Okay, we're going to take two questions, and then we may have some other questions from the panel. Excuse me, sir. We're going to let this woman with the beige blouse go first, and then that gentleman. She's had her hand up from the start.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alana from Made By. This is a question for Barry. Mike Barry, sorry, not Barry. First of all, I want to commend you on Plan A. I think it's amazing that you've set targets for the business, that you're measuring and reporting back on them transparently. I just want to ask two quick questions around two sustainability issues. First of all, the one on effluent. Has a detox campaign which raised a lot of awareness around toxic chemicals being put into the waste, into the water streams. Has that moved effluent higher up the agenda of M&S? And then the second area, product end of life. We know this is a really tricky area within the sustainability agenda. And I know that it's one that M&S are tackling. You talked a little bit about closed-loop technologies. Are you looking at any new business models to help when looking at prolonging life cycle of products?
Sure. I mean, I'll offer some observations in a second, but I think you want to take that?
No, go for it.
Very, very quickly. And I think, James, you might want to talk about new business models here as well. Detox, yes. I think there was a big issue about 10 years ago when it was about chemicals in products generally, chemicals in effluent, chemicals in the consumer's home. I think Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and a number of others did some very smart campaigning that said the chemical industry is not going to change. We'll target the brands that use the chemicals, and they'll be the ones that respond. The chemical industry was very nervous about draconian chemical legislation. To a degree, it got it in Europe with REACH, and that sort of helped it up its game. It was even more nervous about losing big contracts with people like us and many other brands that became concerned. So I think there has been a very sensible response by many in the chemical industry now, and I think we're getting much greener chemistry. Back in the supply chain, because that's the true use of water and effluent in any retail model. It's not our own operations, it's back there. I think that has started to change substantially. I mean, we use over 500 dye houses around the world to put colour into our garments. All of those are covered by a standard, amongst the leading standards of the world. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But again, it's an issue to take very seriously. Product tape back, fantastic question. I said we sell 350 million pieces of clothing each year. You wear it, 80% of it gets thrown away at the end of it. Now, we've started this basic model with Oxfam. It's fantastic. We take clothing back into their shops. People do not use M&S clothing. Oxfam sells it to raise money for Africa. The clothing doesn't go to landfill, so environmental gain. Consumer gets a voucher to come back to my shops rather than going somewhere else. I gain commercially. So that's an interesting first step, but it's 1% of what we sell, 3.5, 4 million items of clothing a year. We're very clear over the next 2, 3, 4 years we can come up with some models to genuinely scale that. And you know what? We get there first, we'll win. This point of disruption, this clothing market will utterly change from what it is now, once through system. The business that gets that consumer can bring things back first will shut everybody else out. So there's great opportunities there.
And it's not just in that business. I think if we can move many products into services, one of the things that in a panel at Davos earlier this year, I had his boss on, and I asked him, how do you make money selling less? And he said, well, actually, there's a lot of work to do to connect with the consumer, but I prefer to make a living out of value rather than volume. So there's a whole conversation in the mainstream retailers about value, about what constitutes value. There's all sorts of conversations still to have with the consumer about buying something of value to hold on to for longer, or taking it back in order to make do and mend. There's this interesting conversation happening there. Similarly, in the automotive industry, we sell cars. They're wasting assets for most of the week if you live in a city. They sit on forecourts for a long period of time. They sit in ports for a long period of time waiting to get onto forecourts. We overproduce massively. They have to go back and be recycled. We're really close to a big flip in the automotive industry, because selling a service might be just a much better business. But so far, only a few outliers and provokers and entrepreneurs are testing the system, whereas the big mainstream manufacturers haven't gone there yet. Thinking about it, but haven't gone there yet. You can see also the connections you have to make between industries that have, if you like, carried a reputation. Oh, the gardening guy's just gone. Carried a reputation. There's been a reason to hammer at the chemical industry for a while for failures of this, that, and the other, including on, of course, dangerous effluents, and millions of chemicals we don't quite understand are out there in the ether. But the chemical industry is working on reinventing itself around bioproducts, around lightweight strength in materials. Okay, so where would that go? Well, that possibly might displace steel in cars, in a motor industry that might be selling a service. And suddenly, you look at the great transformations, the great revolutions in economic cycles come when a number of technologies combine together and make everything look different. In the power sector, we know something like that's got to happen between renewables and storage and information in smart grids. So I'm really interested in these conversions, what's happening. And I don't know which they're all coming from, but they're definitely going to flip. And the changes that we will see will not be nice, steady evolutions, but there'll be some big losses from someone who hasn't got the idea.
They'll be disruptive, but they'll be smart.
Let's hope so.
But again, this won't really get integrated as a system until we create a more structured process around it. In our own corporation, where we manufacture particle and fiber boards, very much like what you would use to manufacture this table, in one of our plants we have managed to get to the point where only 6% of the fiber we use comes from trees. The rest of it is actually recycling of wood, old wood boards, old wood from constructions, or the pruning or sawdust from mills, and etc. The problem is that we actually have to go and fight to find these inputs, because there is no legislation that tells people that wood can go to a landfill or can simply go to be burned as waste. So in this sense, you can make the effort and you can make the expense of going voluntarily into these systems. But until there is legislation supporting you, or some sort of regulation in the system, it won't get generalized and it won't have the transformational impact that we ought to be aspiring to.
So there's no doubt, we're going to go to this gentleman, that capital market players can lead, can be the movers and shakers, but in the end you need a policy framework to make sure there's a level playing field and everybody's playing at the same level. There'll always be leadership, and there should be. It will bring the others up. But we need to get to that policy framework as well. Sir?
Could I offer another take on the value or values question? The three of you with businesses all are affected by what you do, whether you get there with values or, at the end of the day, saving the fiber saves some bottom line. 40% of the CO2 comes from the generation and distribution of electricity, and the electricity industry doesn't have any effect at all. It's straight pass-through, and they haven't improved their efficiency for 50 years. So how do we get at the 40% of the CO2 where there is no bottom line gain from doing anything better?
Do you want me to have a go at that?
James, do you want to try that?
It's a lot of my business, I know. It's almost two, trying to figure that out. Well, part of the answer is regulatory and policy, so that the state, in its many guises, it could be, ideally you'd have a multilateral commitment that would create very substantial market opportunities around the world, but we're, I'm afraid, a long way from getting that. In many federal systems, we're also a long way from getting legislation that would encourage that transformation, but at sub-federal level, and sometimes, if you can, at city level, city ordinances, and in some jurisdictions, the regulatory structure does encourage greater efficiency, the building out of more effective distribution systems. I think in the end, there's no substitute for having a different vision for how you deliver the energy. So, to my mind, whilst there's no particular technology that you would pick, save all others, you do need to reimagine the entirety of the delivery of energy and power to citizens. And I see that as being in a distributed power system. And in order to change from what we have in most countries to that, there is no other way other than to use the power of the state. You can't wander out there and create a distributed power system that will really function efficiently without some state intervention. But you can offer a whole lot of examples of what can be done within the spaces left by the state, because distributed power has this amazing double meaning. It distributes power. If you can create your own power on your rooftop or in your community, that empowers you as against the incumbent political authority. That works particularly well in countries that don't have an extensive grid, where you're already distributing something that didn't exist before. So I think that the starting point is a vision for a wholly different system. It's true that you get there much more effectively if you have an effectively functioning state, and your public authorities can create the regulatory and policy framework that incentivizes that. Kenya, for example, has now got a plan to go from 7 to 90% renewables. That's a plan, very much like yours, that needs implementation, but it's got promise because it's a plan and because there's some people who are going to finance the first stages in it. But after that, the power of example is immense. So the more and more ways you can display what distributed power looks like, and the lights still go on, and you have control and independence and these other values that people crave, the better. And we can put lots of distributed systems on private property holders' roofs and in communities that have some autonomy.
You know, the power of capital market signals is extraordinary. We're talking about capital markets here as it relates to businesses. But in some instances, you really do need policy. Right now, we basically, in the United States, allow for carbon pollution, which has an extraordinary cost to society, be valued at zero. And when things are free, you get a lot more of them. In the very same jurisdiction, that being the United States, in 25 of the states, utility companies are not able to rate base, to be compensated for selling us energy efficiency, for convincing us to do more that is good, rather than selling us coal-fired plant energy. That they get compensated for. Well, until we get those market signals right, and we ought to, and consumers ought to rise up and demand it for all the reasons James is saying, it's hard for companies, not making excuses, but they've got shareholders who are breathing down their back saying, show me what you did for me today. The short-termism of our market is quite complex. So we do need to look at the policy changes collectively as social entrepreneurs, as business people, and say, change the rules of the game. The low-hanging fruit for our energy crisis is energy efficiency. We have barely scratched the surface in what we could get from it, and we're not going to get it in the ways we need, in the quantity, at the scale, until utility companies are able to be compensated, or someone else, for selling us no energy rather than selling us more energy from a power plant that we really shouldn't build, don't need to build, and is going to pollute the world that we live in.
I mean, that's a great question, because every industrial sector will be shifting in different ways. Some will be more about competition, some will be more about policy and regulation. I think the electricity industry is still predominantly about policy regulation. Yeah. But a small part of it, maybe 15-20%, is new entrants into the marketplace who sell the final electricity to the consumer. Yeah. So we're going to have distributed power where you literally have community-led, but you'll also have models where trusted, whether it be retailers, small enterprises come along and start selling electricity and energy to the consumer without the assets and feeling they have to make the assets sweat. So you become a broker for energy. You can source it from anywhere. You can give it to the consumer. You can encourage them to use less. So it won't happen overnight, and it does demand, first and foremost, government change the marketplace of generation. But 20% of it, the icing on the cake, will be new incumbents coming to the marketplace and starting to shift the dynamic by which consumers consume the energy at the end of the day.
Sir.
Yes, my name is Tony Piggott. I'm from J. Walter Thompson Ethos. Just switching over to the demand side of the equation, I want to quote Peter Drucker, who said there are two essential things in business, innovation and marketing. Everything else is a cost. Today, and in the movement toward progressive business, most of the conversation is about finance, about supply chain, about procurement, and policy. Marketing has got to play a significant role to engage all sorts of stakeholders, not just consumers, boards of directors, investors, people in the company itself, big problems in middle management buying into change. So I'd like to hear from the panel why they think marketing is not getting the prominence and focus it deserves in this movement, and certainly is evident in the conversation today and, frankly, the people that are on the panel.
Okay. Can I just welcome that question and the challenge it brings? Forgive us if we've used the wrong language, because you're right. I'm not sure I'd use the word marketing. Everything for me about the sustainability journey, whether as a citizen or as a consumer or as a businessman, is about human change. Most of the technologies that we need to become substantially more sustainable exist today. It's people being willing to recognise them, change to using them, and recognise that there is a better world at the end of it. So human change, of which marketing is a vital element, and, it's been hugely successful for 40, 50 years, driving consumption, that model, will be at the heart of it. I talked about 5 things that change a business. I talked about plan, which is quite technical, innovation, quite technical, but I also talked about the consumer, and I talked about integrating it into the business, which are fundamentally about human change behaviours. So forgive me for using the wrong language and skimming over that, but you're absolutely spot on. It's about human beings.
I'm surprised that I think I spend a lot of my time selling ideas about how things could be other than they are. That's a form of marketing. I'm convinced that despite the very gloomy prospects that you can't avoid if you spend time really diving into the sustainability issues, the root issues, that there is no prospect of making the change without some salesmanship, because optimism is required to sell, right? Optimism sells. Now, the difficulty is in the power relations. I mean, who's paying the bills for the marketing? Who's going to get to the consumer? Now, we're sometimes bedeviled by an awareness or knowledge of complexity. Those who already have strong incumbent positions can, particularly in difficult times, market strongly what you know that is safe and secure. It happens very much in energy. Right? What you know. Now, change, it's a time of insecurity. You don't want too much change. But we won't make the transformation unless what lies ahead looks better. And we probably won't make the transformation unless people feel like life will get better having made the change, that this new stuff is better than the old stuff that I've got. So, and that applies in pretty much everything. We're certainly not winning on climate change because it looks like bad news all around. And when we talk about the good news, that looks like bad news, warmer weather, but we're really stuck. Our communication has really got ground down there, and it's not working. But I think we could have another go in ways of living that look actually very attractive. So the houses and cars and offices and the places, the streets in which we live can look and feel better having solved many of these big sustainable problems. We know all of that, but we just haven't quite built up sufficient confidence to communicate it at scale.
There's also an issue here of incumbency, because I think the marketing industry is perceived as the problem. You're perpetuating this consumption-based model. You've done very well out of it. Yeah. You're not going to be the guys that want to go shoot the golden goose here, are you, surely? Now, in reality, we know there's a skill set within marketing, and there's probably significant will within significant parts of the marketing industry to reinvent towards a sustainable model of consumption. So I think there's also something here about repositioning the marketing industry, and it's putting its hand up and saying, we're willing to be part of this movement for change.
I think it's a function of the marketing industry as well as business seeing that there is a marketplace of social change. Mm-hmm. I think in the advertising business, we say that what interests my boss fascinates me. Our boss is the consumer. The consumer is interested in these things, and there is a very significant lag effect in the obvious storytelling and marketing innovation that's out there to move people toward these new notions of what life could look like that you're suggesting.
And that's where there's business opportunity, where you've got a gap between a need. The consumers are saying we want a more sustainable way of living, but no one's giving it to us.
Yeah.
So the smart business and the smart marketing team working together will win there. And that's going to happen the next 2 or 3 years.
Correct. Roberto, and then we're going to take a question from John.
Just very quickly about the marketing thing. Marketing is about selling more and creating value for consumers. And in this sense, in our case, that we're selling basically a commodity, a wood board, we have created a lot of value in sustainability terms in that. However, we haven't been able to capture a premium in terms of pricing for that. More importantly, the distribution systems in the United States and in Latin America have not differentiated in any way the wood boards from one from the other. We have taken over, and we're now creating our own retailing system so that we can communicate that a little better and hopefully capture some of the additional value. But the fact is that this, again, became supply and corporation driven. It's not market demanded. The market does not have the information of what is the difference between one board and the other. And in that sense, we need to increase communications about sustainability value that simply is not there. The average consumer does not have the information or the criteria to separate one product from the other, and that makes it very hard.
But you're right, and it is starting to change. I mean, for years, General Motors liked to advertise the Hummer, and we'd say, why are you advertising the worst possible piece of transportation that one could ever invent? And it probably shouldn't have been invented other than for war, which really was its purpose. It's a tank. And they said, we advertised what people want. They somehow refused at that time to show leadership around hybrids, around electric vehicles, and so on. I think companies are seeing more and more today that that level of leadership is actually being rewarded, that consumers are starting to hear it, but just happening. Best Buy in the United States, but multinational company, made a decision to take back technology, whether you bought it there or whether you didn't buy it there. So they could recycle parts of the equipment, make sure the toxics don't go into the landfill, win-win on all counts. Very strong for the company. I think people are watching those examples and starting to follow them, and we'll see more. But clearly, hasn't been enough. There needs to be, true turbocharging of the messaging. John Elkington had his hand up. Somebody give him a microphone.
The microphone was supposed to be with John.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mindy. I don't know where I'm in the sequence of questions.
Well,
but
you got the microphone. So
I've got the
it.
microphone. I probably ought to first begin by declaring two interests. I write for Joe Confino, and I'm on a Creating Shared Value advisory board within Nestle. So I'm somewhere uncomfortably in between these two. But I was in Barcelona with Nestle earlier this week, and something came up that I just want to pose to the panel, which was, I think Nestle is, as was said, a rather introverted company, a rather conservative company, and it looks with absolute horror, I'm dramatizing for effect, at what Unilever and Paul Polman are doing in terms of saying, Unilever is going to go from 10% sustainably resourced raw materials and ingredients today to 100% by 2020, frankly without a clue of how it's going to do that. And I think my question to the panel is, what do you think about genuinely stretched targets? I happen to love them. I love Paul Polman. I love what he's doing. But I recognize a certain sort of truth in what Nestle is saying here, which is we want to be able to know that we can deliver against the explicit and implied promises before we actually make the marketing communication, to Tony's point.
I don't mind starting, so you can carry on. In a way, perhaps it's between the cultures. I sit on GE's Eco-Imagination board, and the way GE did this was a huge amount of internal inquiry. Let's not say anything till we've done a lot of analysis, lots of engineering-based analysis, and they didn't. But Jeff Immelt was very alive to the marketing thing, and there'll be no such thing as Eco-Imagination if there wasn't a marketing plan attached to it to sell more GE product of one kind or another, and one or two services too. So I think I've seen the both work, the desire to be sure internally and true to whatever essence you have, and if you're an engineering company, you just want things to be exact, but also the fact that it doesn't work as an idea unless in the end it's translated into revenue streams. And I think more problematic is really knowing what works best for your culture, whether it's your corporate culture or perhaps more broadly your political culture. What is going to motivate that transformation? What is going to be credible to your key constituency? And I don't think you can play around too much with that. You need to intuit it and feel confident that when you go out to make a change and to reach into markets, you've got your people with you. I mean, that's the shorthand way of doing it. But then measurement matters too. So you need to see how you're going. You need to take steps along the way and measure your progress so that people be sure that they're following a path that's worthwhile.
And if I could just complete that, I mean, our sustainability plan, Plan A, 100-point plan we produced 5 years ago, was put together in 3 months. And I remember all the special pleading in the business as to why the targets were too difficult. And the food team said, we can only do 10% packaging reduction. And I remember Stuart Rose just turning around at the end of it, who was our chief executive at the time, and saying, this is bold, guys. I know you don't know the answer, but you're going to deliver 25% reduction. Somebody else would say, we can only reduce waste to landfill by 50%. You're doing 100%. And you know what? By and large, 94%, Stuart Rose was right. He forced the business to confront itself and find solutions that it never imagined it could get. Now, to James's point here, you need to follow that big, bold dream with detail. The plan, the assurance, the report every year to say, this is how we're doing, this is the evidence of what we're doing. Otherwise, it becomes just flaky greenwash. So I believe there is a truth in between, which is you must have bold ambition, but it must be underpinned by rigor, detail, analysis, and reporting.
So I'm going to take the final shot and ask our panelists as we're about to close out this session, where's the hope? I mean, we're in flux. That's the name of the conference. Yeah. We're being told at every event that it is about scale. It is about change, transformative change and scale. Within the capital markets that we're talking about, where's your hope coming from, James, and how are we going to get there? And we're going to ask each of our panelists to close with their wisdom.
Well, first half of the sentence is really quite prosaic. I think there's an awful lot of money on corporate balance sheets. I think when we talk about capital markets, we mean not just the font of capital and the big institutional investors that you work with every day, and I've certainly spent time with in the Carbon Disclosure Project and other places, but also where capital comes from to make the change. And there's a lot on corporate balance sheets, and a lot of the other options don't look too terrific right now. So it's a very good time to present arguments for investment that are associated with these sets of issues and problems and categories for investment that we think are attractive. So good moment to present ideas that perhaps would not have been looked at in the boom times when other assets were doing extremely well and there was a kind of formulaic distribution in the big asset managers. Now it is in flux, so get in there and say, actually, you can get good returns that are more stable, that are more politically secure, because we're building consensus, we're building real cooperation at the local level. You're less subject to volatility if you invest in a sustainable way. And that case can be built in pretty traditional asset classes like land and property, and in big companies that have got a plan. So I think I draw hope from the fact that in this state of flux there's a demand for new ideas, and a lot of the competitive arguments have been damaged. They've damaged themselves. So there's a chance to put some alternatives in there and be constructive.
Great, James. Thank you. Gary, give us hope.
Fantastic question. I think there's lots of dynamics attacking businesses from all directions. And if we look at price risk management and what's happening in the volatile commodity markets going forward, we look at increased consumerism and the rate of urbanization in some countries and people, because of income growth, becoming new consumers. These are some of the challenges and the worries going forward. Marry that with bringing recognition of the true value of drinking water and its availability going forward. So it's not only about hydration for the human being, but it's about agricultural crops and the demands that this increased world population will have in terms of the need for water going forward. And valuing that significantly is certainly some of the challenges that we have going forward. In terms of hope, I do believe that a lot of the boards, especially the food and drink businesses, are now understanding it. They're getting it. And I think we're starting to see it cascade from the top down, back down through the business. So we talk about values organizations and where we're going. I believe that we are starting to see the leaders in the various different categories bringing those values to life, and that's where the hope will come from, that things like creating shared value will drive a lot of the strategies, because by investing in that area, there is a return at the end of the day. There is a solution that can be developed. Broad, open-ended challenges sometimes actually bring out the best thinking. So I think that's where some of the hope comes from.
Great. And Mike?
Well, I was going to say exactly the same, so I'll offer a different observation. There is hope because boards are increasingly getting it, because the realities of pressure on the business are becoming real. And let's just capture that and put it to one side. Let me just turn to the consumer. All our market research is saying that 80% of consumers consistently in all the marketplaces around the world where we operate want change. They just can't see how it's going to happen, and they haven't yet bumped into a business model that's offered to it in a simple, accessible, no-on-cost kind of way. As soon as some bright spark of an entrepreneur or a big business finds a way to turn the key in that door, they'll make a lot of money, and a lot of people will follow them.
As I was listening to them, I just realized I haven't told you anything about our corporation. Fundamentally, we run a triple bottom line corporation, and we have done so for more than 10 years now. In doing so, we have created incentives for our executives, for example, that are only 70% determined by financial returns. The other 30% is determined by social and environmental returns, with a caveat, which is that if you do not perform in social and environmental terms, you do not get your bonus for financial performance. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is a lot of radical organizations out there. Ours is one of them. Viva Trust operates a public company. We're publicly traded in Chile. We have about 65% of the shares of this corporation, and the dividends that don't get reinvested in growth of the business actually get invested in social and environmental philanthropy in the region. 100% of whatever is left from not investing. That has led to an investment of approximately $148 million over the past 10 years in philanthropy in Latin America. And the reason I mention this now is because these organizations actually create incredible value for in social, environmental, and productive terms. We are a competitive organization. One of the most interesting things, and this is what I wanted to underscore, is that our partners are the pension funds in Chile. This is the other 35% of our shares. And these organizations, they need to be responsible in terms of the pensions of the workers in Chile. And they're right now investing with us in Mexico, investing with us in Brazil to grow the corporation, because they have now understood that long-term shareholder return is what really makes a difference. They are no longer evaluating what happens in the market every other day, every other week. They now understand that we are creating a sustainable shareholder return for them. So not only in the consumer market, but also in the capital markets, we're finding a new type of investor, a new type of response to our proposals. As long as they are consistent in the long term, they have the right values, the right structure, and of course, they are delivering what they offer. And this is fundamental. One of the reasons we do this, and these shareholders feel so safe, is because there is this radical organization which is not taking the money home, but actually investing it in the communities and in the environment to make sure that we continue raising the quality of that environment for the corporation to perform better in the future. So I think there is a big lesson to be learned there, in the sense that all of us need to think more in the terms that Nestle is doing with the coffee growers, that we are seeing in textiles, and of course in the entire value chain of textiles, and in many others today. And one of the reasons that I'm very hopeful about the future is that we are now communicating this as examples and success, and not simply as the exceptional cases of an idealist that went that away. That's not the case anymore. This is coming to the mainstream, and the more it does so, the better we will be off.
Terrific. Well, join me in thanking our panelists for giving us hope. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And it's 5:30 that we're gathering. We'll see you then. Take care.